All right, hello guys. As you can see, we're roughing it today. I moved recently and the new house doesn't have internet yet, so the phone is my only connection and there are no reliable phone holders in the house. So we broadcasting from my mom mobile today. I'm Lydia Taylor. I'm a licensed judge and a technical delegate for Confederation of Working Equitation. And we are continuing, this is episode 4 of our Let's Talk About Working Equitation series, which is sponsored as an educational outreach by Indiana Working Equitation Association. Check out their webpage, please, too. So last time we started talking about working equitation obstacles. There are 19 that are internationally recognized, plus 4 more that are recognized in this country. Let's see if we can make... Nope, this is better. And last Thursday we covered first 7, which were the bridge, figure 8, the livestock pen, the jug, pick up the pole, secure the ring, and deposit the pole. If any questions come up on those past obstacles, please feel free to ask. I will try to answer them as well. And today we're moving on to the next one, and this is the order that they listed in the rule book, just in case you want to keep track of. The rule book is available for download on Confederation website, which is confederationwe.us. Rule book, there's a separate appendix B, that has all the obstacles with diagrams, size, ideal execution, what the judges are looking for. Excellent resource. All right, switch cup. Switch cup, if you remember last time I mentioned that for myself, I like to categorize obstacles in 3 groups. There are the transition ones, the lateral work ones, and bending suppleness testing ones. So, and obviously many obstacles are a combination of those elements. But for me, switch cup is mostly a transition obstacle. All there is 2 poles. Usually we use pole bending poles. Should be about 2 meters high, which is about 6.5 feet. If your pole is only 6 feet, don't worry, it's perfectly acceptable. Spaced 4 foot apart. And according to the level, the rider either trots up or walks up to it, holds so the rider's knees between the 2 poles, so the rider's body is right in between 2 poles, and one of the poles will have a cup turned upside down on top of it. In the same competition, the same class, the cup should always be on the same pole for the same riders. So the rider holds the horse squarely, reaches, picks up the cup, switches it to the opposite pole, and rides out. Sounds very, very, very easy. It really is not that easy. For once, you need to ride a clean transition into square in the mobile hold, which means the transition has to be well prepared so the horse doesn't fidget while you reach around for the cup. So immobility becomes an issue. The mistake most riders make is reaching for the cup too soon. The horse didn't quite settle yet with the weight evenly over all 4 feet, and the rider's already reaching towards the cup, which could be on the right, on the left side, whatever course designers decided, and that upsets horse's balance, and the rider forces the horse to take a balancing step, which of course brings the mark down. So don't rush. Count to 3 once you hold it. Reach for the cup. Sometimes 4 feet is not too wide, but sometimes riders, petite riders on smaller horses, find that they can, or with the shoulder mobility issues, find that they cannot reach far enough across to the opposite side. It's okay to sidestep your horse to the pole to close the gap so you can comfortably place the cup upside down. It should be obvious to the judge that this was not a loss of balance on the horse's part, but a maneuver asked by the rider in order for them to complete the obstacle. And the depart, of course, has to agrees with what the rider was asked to do in the dressage test. So if in the dressage test, which starting with intro, there's trot, hold, trot transitions. If you trot it in and hold it, you expect it to trot out of it. Of course, it's ideal. Don't stress if you put a step of walk into it, but this is a schooling goal, to be able to write clean upward transitions out of the hold. And that's a switch cup. By the way, when you on the field, before you start your test and you're walking around, quickly check that the cup is in the same position that the previous competitor had it. Yes, the show organizer is supposed to keep track of it, but we all humans, sometimes mistakes happen and the ground crew forgets to reset that cup. To keep things fair, it's perfectly fine to walk up to the judge and point out that the cup is not where it belongs, and could the ground crew please rectify the situation. All right, that's the switch cup obstacle. Next three obstacles are related. We have a bell corridor, rein back in the figure of L, shape of L, and rounding of posts. I'll go through them separately, but then we will talk about schooling for them all together, because all those three obstacles are heavy on rein back. First, bell corridor. And this is the most straightforward out of the rein back group of obstacles. The bell corridor is 5 feet wide. The rails that set up a corridor about 12 inches high, minimum 12 inches high. It could be a small wall, could be any kind of obstacle that's minimum 12 inches high. I've used in the past just the jumping standards with a pole set at a foot tall. With the bell at the end of the corridor set up so the bell is hanging about 6.5 feet off the ground in the middle of the corridor. The rider then either walks, trots, or canters in, whatever option is at your level, holds the horse, and this is where it gets tricky. Remember that you cannot switch your hand for the bell for any of the obstacles. So if you're a righty, you will need to ride in and then angle your horse slightly to the left so your right hand is available to ring the bell. If you're lefty, you will have to wedge your horse's nose a little bit to the right so your left hand is closer to the bell. There are, once in a while, you'll come across a show where the bell is set such a setup that you can only approach from one side, and sometimes it happens that the bell is on the left when you're a righty. You have to remember to reach with your right hand, even if you have to reach over to ring it. You may not switch hands. That's an instant disqualification. You ring the bell, and make sure you ring it loudly enough for the judge to hear it. The judge may well be on the other side of the arena. If the judge did not hear the bell, then you didn't ring it. It doesn't count. And followed by the rein back all the way back out of the corridor. Very often this obstacle is used with entry markers, and that's your transition point. So you need, if you have the entry markers, you should back all the way out of the entry markers before you turn around and leave this obstacle. Next is rein back in L, and it so happens that L rein back is often combined with the bell obstacle. You do not rein back in L formation in intro and children's levels. Starting at novice, it may be asked of you. The bend could be right or left. It's entirely up to the show organizers. And when you see in the handy little chart in the rule book that you have an option of the gaits, trot or canter, walk or trot, it means the choice of the gait to get to the bell. So if you choose to canter, it means that you will have to canter 90-degree turn in a 5-foot corridor and then have to ride a clean canter walk transition. So be prepared for that. The dimensions, again, the length, the long rails will be 12 foot. So on the long side of the rein back will be 12 foot one way and then 12 foot in 90-degree direction. The width changes on this obstacle. For novice and intermediate levels, it's 5 foot. When we go up to advanced and masters, go down to 4 feet, which is pretty tight. The same in terms of the bell. You'll have to choose your side. Make sure you use correct hand. And then rein back around the 90-degree turn. Touching an obstacle, if you didn't drop it, if you just rubbed the fence, will lower the score somewhat, but it's not as disastrous. If you actually knock the rail over, you will go in the negative territory on this obstacle. And the next rainback obstacle is a rounding of the posts. This is an obstacle that, again, not used in children's and intro levels. Novice level riders back straight out of it, and from intermediate and up, you ride as intended. What this obstacle is 3 pairs of pole bending poles. They're set 5 feet wide, so it's a 5-foot wide corridor, and lengthwise, it's minimum of 8 feet between the poles and maximum of 10. At the end, the farthest from the rider, from the entrance pair of poles, there are 2 cups on either side. The riders either walks, trots, or canters in, holds by the pair of the poles that have the cups on either side. It is a rider's choice which cup to pick up, on the right or on the left, as long as the rider keeps keeping the same hand. So as a rider, I may choose to pick up the left cup on my left side, but I'll have to do it with my right hand. And then, as I said, novices just back straight out, which makes just a long straight rein back. It's minimum 16 to 20 feet with a flimsy pole, so you got to keep it straight in the rein back. And the higher levels, you proceed to ride. I picked up a cup on the right side, you ride those that line of cones, of poles rather, on the right as a slalom. So when you start backing, if I have a cup on the right, you're gonna back with the quarters to the right, so you're gonna end up with the horse's bodies to the right of the middle post, and then you angle back to the left, so in the last pair of poles you end up between them within the corridor. You replace the cup, finish backing up, and ride out. So let's talk about the rein back. Rein back is probably one of the most underschooled exercises across all disciplines, probably. What the judges will be looking in all 3 of those obstacles, the bell, the L, and the rounding, is purity of the gait. The rein back should be a 2-beat diagonal gait. So it's like a trot, only there's no suspension phase. But clearly pairs of legs should be picked up and set down, no toe dragging. The horse should stay round with relaxed back, relaxed at the pole, have active steps, no dragging toes through the dirt, and keep the rhythm. Sometimes you see the horses literally running backwards, they avoiding perhaps a harsh aid or expecting a harsh aid. That's also a negative. Going too fast out of balance backwards is not a good thing. In the rounding of obstacles, when you turn the horse while you're backing right or left, it should be done with the correct bend. So if the quarter's going to the right, the whole body should be bent to the right, and when you switch bend, the bend also should change to the left to finish the exercise. I rarely come across riders who routinely school rein back on curved lines, unfortunately. But once you talk this through, what sets the horse's bend when you're going forward? It's a rider's seat. So if you pay attention to simply put your seat in where it should be for the right bend or the left bend, you will find that you have quite a bit of a control over the horse's bend, even in the rein back. Do not overschool it, of course. If you've never done it, don't start spending half an hour drilling the rein back. It's physically demanding, as a lot of working equitation exercises. So introduce it perhaps in the short reprises, maybe 3 repetitions of 3 steps or 5 steps. For my own personal horse, when I ride out and I have a gentle hill, I will do a couple of sets of rein back uphill and down the hill to as a physical fitness and balance check. My horse had a bout with EPM, and the way I became aware of it very early is when our up and downhill rein backs became very iffy, when everything else was totally fine. So if your terrain allows, that's a good idea to include. Then, so that's our rein back exercises. The next one is a single slalom. This is a suppleness bending exercise. 5 poles, as usual. Poles are 6.5 feet high or close to it, set in a straight line, 20 feet apart. 5 poles is an absolute minimum. If it's recommended, at least 7 for higher levels. Sometimes there will be, most of the times, there will be a marker placed by the course designer showing you which side of the first pole you need to approach, on the right or on the left. And this is important for the flow of the course, because that gives you the bend on which you're going to exit the exercise and how you're going to approach the next obstacle, so pay attention. This exercise should not be ridden as a full serpentine. You have enough to show enough bend to curve. Let's say I'm approaching on the right side of the first pole, so I'm bent left. Right about the middle mark between 2 poles, you change bend. If you're cantering, then you change lead. If you're cantering and changing lead through trot, it means you have to transition to trot well before the middle mark between the 2 poles. So you place your canter depart right after it. Then you change bend, then you trotting or cantering left, change bend, and repeat. So here, symmetry is very important. When you're entering the obstacle, visually check how far you are from the pole on your side. Take a quick glance. And this is how far you should be on the other side every time you cross the center line of the exercise. Another helpful approach, particularly to riders cantering, would be to count the strides from change to change. So let's say I entered 2, 3, change, and then we're going to canter right 2, 3, 4, change, left 3, 4. Just picked 4 because that's fairly common, but that helps to make sure that when you're schooling, that you keeping the symmetry very accurate. Because if you're going more strides, perhaps you went too wide, less strides too straight, and don't go too wide around. That is the single slalom. Onto the double slalom. This is arguably, to me at least, this is the hardest obstacle in the whole working equitation array. And for me, this is the obstacle that will dictate which level you show it. Not even the dressage level, but the double slalom. The double slalom has a minimum of 5 poles set on 2 lines. In each line, poles are 20 feet apart. Between 2 lines, there's 20 feet, and they staggered, offset by 10 foot to each other. Ideal execution in this exercise is like a perfect serpentine with a half a 10-foot diameter circle straight, few strides, another half a 10-foot circle straight, and continue on. At the highest level, 7 poles are required at minimum. Why is this? I think this exercise is this difficult. Simply because half of a 10-foot circle, even at the trot, requires tremendous amount of strength to be performed with correct bend, with correct balance. Most horses at the lower levels will not be able to negotiate it quite as tightly. So what do we do then? An intermediate approach would be to ride slightly larger half circles, which will turn your serpentine with parallel lines into a candy cane shape. When you go wider, cross around, go wider, so like a candy ribbon rolling around. If you do that, you still have to pay attention that your half turns right are the same diameter of half turns left, and that you change bend exactly in the middle line of the exercise, 10 foot from one side of the poles and 10 foot from the other. Now, going too wide will remove all difficulty from this exercise, and you will probably be marked as saying that exercise is too wide. More common problem, though, is asymmetry. The rider goes really tight on the side that the horse is able to negotiate, and then is forced to go wider on the opposite side. And this is very noticeable for the judge, and this will get you marks down in a hurry. So ride the diameter of the half turn the best you can do on your difficult side. So which means on your large side, on your strong side, you need to ride a little larger to make it equal. Falling out of the gates, if you're trotting, then taking walk steps. If you're cantering, taking walk or trot steps will drop the score into a negative territory, 4 and under. So it's important not to overpace the horse and make the turn so tight that he can't simply sustain the trot and must put a walk step in. Riding correct bend is very important too. If you rode the whole circuit and your horse stayed bent, let's say left the entire time, this is also a negative mark. This is exercise that tests the suppleness and obedience to the rider's aids to change direction. So pay attention to that. If you're riding flying changes or changes of lead through walk or trot, again, centering them so they happen right in the middle between the two lines of the poles is very challenging. 20 feet is not a whole lot of territory when you have to ride, come out of the turn, ride a downward transition, change bend, pick up the new canter, and immediately go on the next turn, and then repeat it 4 more times. And that is why this obstacle sets the level at which you're going to show. Because let's say novice B has the first change of lead and canter through trot, but there are only 2 changes, one in each direction, done on a diagonal, on a long diagonal in the dressage arena. This is far cry from doing them 4 times in a row, coming from bend to bend, and with very limited 20 feet in which to execute it. So even though my horse could do novice B dressage test, he's nowhere ready to do novice B double slalom, which is required to be performed at the canter. And that's another obstacle that I would strongly urge you not to school excessively or drill at all. The preparation for this exercise is done on flat work, riding circles, figure eights, spirals in and out. So your general suppling and strengthening work, just setting up this obstacle with cones on the ground, marking it out, and riding it over and over again, it will probably get your horse sore, if not hurt. So take it easy on this one. That could be difficult. Next, we have the gate. The gate usually set up in most shows just two jumping standards and the rope. If you are at the A-rated show, the gate must be a solid gate with 2 latches supporting it on one side, 6.5 feet wide minimum. But most you will see rope gates, and at the speed round you will most certainly see a rope gate. It's required for safety reasons. The rope or the top of the gate, if it's a solid one, should be at minimum at 4 foot 3 inches high. This obstacle may or may not have entry and exit markers. If you do have entry and exit markers, those are your transition points. So when your horse's nose crosses the markers on the way in, and when the horse's tail crosses the markers on the way out, that's when you change the gate to whatever you're using between the obstacles. You approach this obstacle always at 90 degrees. You ride at the gate as if you're going to jump it. Jumpers, be careful. There have been cases of horses actually committing and jumping. Don't do that. As you approach, if you do not have markers, then you visually pick a spot roughly horse length away from the gate. What's a horse length away? Roughly 9 feet, 1 stride out. You transition to the walk. You continue riding forward and sideways till you stop parallel to the gate, hopefully with your arm resting right next to where the latch is. You show again, square in the mobile hold. And a quick note, this gait is one of the exercises that can be ridden backward and forward. We're talking about the forward gait now. So then with your right hand, you pick up, if it's a rope, you pick up the rope. If it's a solid gate with a latch, you unlatch the gate and put your hand on top of the gate. It's important to have the hand on the gate, especially solid one, at all times. If you lose control of the gate during the execution of exercise, it's going to bring you to the negative score in a hurry. So while you have the rope or the hand on the gate, you need to back up a step or two, whatever needed for your horse to make a turn to the right through the gate. Remember, anytime you go forward, anytime you go sideways, correct bend is required, so your horse should be looking right if he's going right. On the opposite side, as soon as you cleared the gate, you stop and might have to rein back a step or two till your hand is close to the pole or to whatever latch mechanism is to close the gate, and then you're done. Now, whether this obstacle goes wrong most of the times is as the horse goes through the gate and then backs to the rider is so intent on watching where the gate is, and all attention is towards the gate, that oftentimes they unseat themselves. The outside, the left sit bone lifts up and the horse ends up stepping too far out away from the gate. And then you have to make a correction to sidestep back to it. So keep your seat, don't overreach, make the horse move just as much as you need to. And then the same with the rein back, make sure you're backing step at a time, the horse doesn't run backwards. Then you latch the gate, turn away, and ride whatever your next obstacle is. Now, what happens if it's a forward gate for riding and you happen to be a lefty? Well, you're out of luck. You need to ride it backwards, which means when you approach the gate, instead of swinging with your right side towards the gate, you need to swing your left side, your dominant side, towards the latch. And then when you pick up the rope, you're going to walk forward till the horse's hindquarters clear the latch side of the gate, and then back him through the opening, and then close the gate with your left hand. Now, because this is exercise that this obstacle can be used twice, and oftentimes when the arena's space is at the premium, the course designers will put it twice. As long as there's another obstacle performed in between, it's perfectly legal. If you're doing it twice, then it's the most fair approach to the gate, because everybody, righties and lefties, end up doing it with dominant and non-dominant side. So if the right-handed gate needs to be ridden backwards, then the right-handed rider will now have to pick up the opposite side latch, walk forward, and then back the horse through the gate. Now, and the gate is always ridden at the walk. This is another exercise where it helps not to rush. When you hold it, before you go to pick up the latch, make sure the horse stops. Make sure he's in balance, so when you reach, he's not going to go with you. All right. That's a gate. Next, a jump. So jump had an update for the newest edition of the rules. Jump used to not show up until novice level. Now we can have a jump starting with children's division and intro, but at those levels it's a simple ground pole. It's a ground pole set between the jump standards, obviously with the cups removed, and you can put a ground line poles before and after, and they walk or trot over it. The jump is the other obstacle that can be ridden in both directions as long as there is another obstacle in between. Then at the novice level, you have an option of a trot approach, I believe. In a novice level, the jump is still a cross rail, about 22 inches on the standard side and 15 inches in the middle. Standard 10-foot long poles. What is expected of the jump? Just the obedience of the horse approaching, steady tempo on entry and exit, not overreacting, trusting the rider to get through. I personally don't jump a lot, but we do school cavaletti. I have a big horse for whom 15 inches is a cavaletti stride, which becomes a challenge because he must show a jump. Again, if you have not jumped before, you don't have experience, don't start jumping. Start at the ground zero, ground poles, walk, trot, slowly move up to canter, slowly raise them. Don't rush your horse. It's very easy to make him sour to the jump. Next, we have side pass rails. And those do not appear also children's or intro level. They start at the novice. And on the novice level, side pass rails are 12-foot long rails raised up to 4 inches off the ground. And on novice level, you can have either A or B, either single rail, and then you need to read your course map carefully. It will say whether you need to approach a certain side. If there are no specific directives, you choose a side in which you need to side pass. It could be 2 rails in line with 10-foot break between them, then you side pass one side, then you change on the other. Or it could be 2 rails parallel to each other with 10 feet in between. And again, if there are no directions on the map, you pick which side you ride first. At intermediate level, the configuration could become an L shape. If you're riding side pass in the L shape, you put the horse's nose inside of this L and hindquarters go wide. And at the advanced and master's level, you can be asked to ride a zigzag. And zigzag does not look like a letter Z. Zigzag consists of 90-degree turns, so basically 2 figure L formations put together. Now, ideal execution, both front and back legs clearly crossing over the entire length of the pole. If your horse steps off too soon, the obstacle considered incomplete. So it's very important to do that. If the horse should show clear crossing front and back, ideally with a bend in direction of travel. And the novice level, perhaps horse is not strong enough yet, so keeping the body straight as you would on a leg yield would be great. But the mistake would be to execute it in strong counterband where the horse falls out on the leading shoulder. That would not be correct. Those obstacles, the configuration side rail pass usually has entry and exit markers. Sometimes riders are so relieved having gotten through the side rail pole that they forget to ride out of the exit markers, and that is a course error. So here's my chance to mention course errors. Course error is an error that you are able to fix. So if I rode the side pass well and I'm so relieved and I exited, and before I started the next obstacle I realized that I never went through the exit markers, I have an option to turn back and go through those exit markers. It will bring my score down significantly, but I will not be disqualified. If I did not fix this error and started the next obstacle, the error would be considered made, and that's a disqualification. So mind your markers. All right. Then, and a note on side pass rail on the schooling. Usually we have the issue of horses having something passing underneath their bellies as they side pass. They could have beautiful leg yields or side passes out on the flat, but just introducing an object on the ground makes them worry because they can't see under their bellies. For the rider's part too, I find that riders want to see the pole, and in doing so, we place it too far forward towards the front legs of the horse. When he hits them with the hoof, becomes worried and becomes difficult to execute smoothly. So for me, once I entered the obstacle, I try to place it under the cantle of my saddle, so the back of my seat, and that places it in good position for my horse not to interfere with front or back legs. When you first start schooling over the pole, do not start with the entire 12 feet. That's not reasonable to expect. maybe enter over the last 2 feet and exit in the side pass, and then slowly increase. Next time, maybe you'll be able to walk over middle of the pole and then exit off the end of the rail for 6 feet, and eventually you can build it up to the full 12 feet in the different configurations. Make sure you school both sides equally, needless to say, because that's the test when you go right and left. And work on horse reacting more to your weight and your leg, because that's one of the exercises that you can be asked to do while carrying a garrocha. All right, side pass rail. Next, water. Water is usually we see when the course is set up outside in the outdoor course, or maybe indoor where they have access to Liverpool jumps perhaps. Water is always walked. It just tests the horse's obedience and willingness to cross the water. It's 5 foot wide in the direction of travel and 8 foot wide across. If it's the same depth all over, it should be 4 inches deep. And if it has a sloped entry and exit, it can go deeper. Make sure that the footing is safe, both in the shallow straight one and with incline in the ramp. The difficulty here that the water is only 5 foot, particularly if you have a jumper and you're approaching at the canter. The horse must touch the water at least with 1 foot. If your horse hopped over the water, this obstacle is not executed. Again, you have an option to go back and do it again, but he must go through. Then we have a bank jump, which is also usually outdoor obstacle. And this one could be set up in several ways. It could be jump up on a bank, and the height usually between 1 and 2 feet, and then ramp down to it. It could be ramp up to the plateau and then jump down a foot or two, or it could be both. You jump up to a level plateau and then jump back off. If that's the case, the top platform should be at least 6.5 foot tall, so the horse can put a stride in there. Much like with a jump, this is an obstacle that tests the horse's willingness to approach a new kind of obstacle. So steady rhythm, steady seat, steady line on exit and entry will get you good marks. And then we have the drums obstacle. This one is 3 barrels that's set on 30. Sorry, I disappeared. Okay, drums. Barrel set 13 feet on center in an equilateral triangle. At the highest levels of the advanced and masters, they're only 10 feet apart. And the ideal execution then would be to approach the drums which you start with should be clearly marked, the right drum or the left drum, because not this rule update, the previous rule update, this obstacle can be ridden either to the right or to the left. So if you're riding, if your marker says, your course map says right to the right first, you ride all the way around the right drum. Then when your knees are between the right and the center drum, you change bend, you ride 3/4 around your middle drum, change bend again, and ride all the way around to the right around the last drum. So as you can see, whatever direction you're riding in, that's the heavily weighted for that direction. So 2 complete turns to the right and only 3/4 to the left. There are also 2 changes of direction. The smallest diameter that you can manage, but again, just as in a double slalom, if the horse breaks the gate, falls out of the trot or canter, you immediately go to the negative territory for your scores. So as small as you can manage, well balanced and correct bend. This is important. Placing of your change of bend is important as well. It should be on a line from center drum to the center of the drum that you're crossing. Very often when you change bend, that middle 3/4 of a circle ends up a different diameter. Make sure that you're riding it just as large or as small as you're riding the previous one. That's another obstacle that I probably wouldn't school just the obstacle itself. This is something that needs work on spirals and circles, increasing and decreasing circles, lateral work, increasing your horse's strength and flexibility, and test it once in a while on the drums, but it's not something you should be schooling on the drums all the time. This is another obstacle that could be asked to be ridden with a garrocha in hand. So it's a good way to test. Don't take garrocha right away, but once in a while put the reins in one hand and see how well you're able to change bend and control the diameter of the circle, and that may show some training problems that you can go back and address in the next training session. Hi, Dorothy. That's the drums. And another, you know what, I want to mention a very common mistake besides the symmetry in the drums is when the rider changes bend, they end up riding, instead of, if you look in overhead pattern, looking like a whole circle connected to 3/4 of a circle, it starts looking like a bow tie. The rider turns, if you're going from right to left, too soon, so the horse is never really in a position where he's perpendicular the line from one center of the barrel to another. So don't rush your turns. Don't fall into the new barrel, but rather maybe enlarge the circle to keep your balance into the new barrel. So this drums concludes the 19 obstacles that are internationally recognized obstacles by Huawei. This is what you can see in any international competition and recognize on the YouTube videos that you watch. Now, in US, we also recognize 4 more obstacles, which are largely regional background, but they totally legal to use in any competition. First is move sack from table to table. The platform or the barrel or whatever you use for support should be minimum 4 foot high. The rider in the lower levels can hold to pick up the sack, and the sack should be made of natural material, burlap or canvas, not crinkly plastic or anything. And then move it to the next table, whatever it's designed, drop it off and move on. Dragging an item, that would be another table, 4-foot table with a rope coiled on top of it and the other end attached to whatever object. Could be a log, could be whatever the show designer can come up with. Remembering that not all riders have Western saddles with horns, so not everybody can dolly. So it should be light enough for the rider to comfortably pull in the hand, just rope in hand with nothing to attach it to. Now, the drag obstacle could be designed as picking up the rope and going to the next table, or it could be going around another barrel like a U-turn. Any pattern that the course designer comes up with is legal. Could be slalom between the posts. That is done at the walk. Then we have varied footing, which is similar to water, but it could be, so it's a wide swath of, could be sand, could be plywood, anything that's feel wet sand even, that will feel differently to the horse, or look differently to the horse. Again, simply test his desire and trust in the rider to go where he's pointed. Then we have a herding cattle obstacle. This is not the cattle phase. This is a separate obstacle. This is hard to find just because it's hard to set up. Requires a lot of space and requires cattle, obviously. There are 2 conjoined cattle pens. They're minimum 20-foot squares on each side. There's a gate leading into one pen, gate between the pens, and the gate out of the second pen. So 3 gates. All 3 should be able to be operated from a horseback. When the rider opens the gate and rides into the first empty pen, the cattle is in the second pen. Then he opens the middle gate, walks in the pen with the cattle, moves the cattle from one pen to another, closes the middle gate behind the cattle, opens the gate on the opposite side of the empty pen now, and rides out. So this does not happen very often, just for the hardship of setting up. So those are the obstacles. If you missed the last broadcast with the first 7, feel free to go to Indiana Working Equitation Association Facebook page, and under videos, all the episodes are saved. Feel free to post questions. I will get to them. I will answer them all. I will post, when we're done, I will post the link to the Confederation rulebook and the appendix with the obstacles. In the move, I don't have the book with me to show you, but we do have a Working Equitation handbook on ease of handling that's available. I will post that link as well. Tremendously useful book. And next time we'll meet, next Thursday, we'll talk about more general rules for ease of handling trial. The disqualifications, the warm-up rules, the execution, course errors, all that, and maybe talk about, depending how much time it takes, we'll mention speed, and then I also want to do a segment of a few minutes on what to expect at your first show, what happens at the Working Equitation show, how things go, what do you do, where do you go. So I hope to see you next time. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you at some competitions this year.